Greetings and salutations, folks. My name is Nick, and this is the May Update. Today's topic will be loot boxes. I find that the topic of loot boxes is something that I'm largely bringing up because of its prominent presence in the news. The fact that major news sites and papers and channels are covering loot boxes largely because of the whole Star Wars Battlefront 2 fiasco, and there's still things going on in Congress because of loot boxes, and I feel that's appropriate reason to bring it up, mainly because normally loot boxes are something that I ignore as a player. I purchased Star Wars Battlefront 2 knowing that it was going to have the kind of messed up multiplayer system, but I didn't play the multiplayer, so the loot boxes there didn't affect me. I've played Overwatch, which is one of the biggest reasons why loot boxes had become a thing in video games. But I've never purchased any loot boxes in the game. I've seen various YouTubers. The most prominent one that I can think of would be, I guess now he's more of a streamer than a YouTuber, Angriest Pat, formerly of Super Best Friends. He purchased like hundreds of dollars worth of loot boxes from Overwatch. And before I go even farther, let's say for some reason you happen to find my channel without really much knowledge as to video games or loot boxes. So I might as well lay the groundwork for the definition here. Loot box, we're just going to call a physical or a digital or physical mystery item. You purchase a box containing mystery. The easiest way to kind of define what a loot box is just to refer to the subscription service, loot box. Where you would order a package. Usually it would be a themed package. You'd pay like a monthly subscription. They would send out packages. Themed package would come in, but you don't know what's inside of it. What could be in it? A weird ear soap thing? I don't know. It could be anything. But it might be related to these properties. With Star Wars Battlefront 2, you buy a loot box. You don't know what's going to be in it. Is it going to be an upgrade for your blaster? Is it going to be a new character? You don't know. You spend the money, you get the loot box, and then you find out. Overwatch is much the same way, although Overwatch focuses more on costumes and emotes. And the fact that people spend so much money trying to get that right costume is especially interesting, considering the fact that when you're playing the game, it's first person, so you wouldn't really see your character. You only really see your character in their costume at the end of a match. But that's something completely unrelated to what we're talking about now. We're just talking about the idea of whether loot boxes are a form of gambling. Now, in order to get to that point, I would like to start with the origins of loot boxes, so to speak. I would imagine that the earliest form of loot boxes, in any sense of the word, started with Magic the Gathering, because with Magic the Gathering, you would purchase your intro deck. Your intro deck will get you started, but you don't just play with your intro deck. You have to buy the add-on packs, but the add-on packs are random. You buy the add-on packs hoping to get good cards, but it's a gamble, whether or not you're going to get anything useful. So you find yourself spending money. So to get more packs, in order to get more cards, in order to get the best cards. So I guess at that point, I probably would have to do research to figure out what came first, the Pokemon card game or Magic the Gathering. That I don't know offhand, but the idea of the collectible card goes way back, even farther than Magic, to baseball trading cards where people are trying to get their specific favorite player. But let's just kind of consolidate this. This isn't meant to be the encyclopedic history. This is just my opinion, man. So we go from the card games, and then we get to, I would say mobile games would be the next step for the loot box. Largely because with mobile games, there's this fear of spending money on a mobile game. To this day, I still see new games come out for like $6, and people would post, "Wow, this game was great. Controls were fantastic, but way too short for $6." The idea that people would, and I feel that I buy into that stereotype myself. Like, on the main menu for my iPhone, I can see the various new games, advertised games, and one of the games that popped up earlier yesterday was Valkyrie Profile, which I think was originally on the PSP, but I could be horribly wrong. And the Square was charging $18 for it, and I'm like, do I really want to spend $18 on a game for my phone? And it's not that I don't want to spend $18 on a game for my phone, as much as I don't really want to buy that game for my phone. That's not really the way that I want to experience that game. But I feel that kind of stereotyping, the idea of spending larger amounts of money in one bulk purchase, is something that gamers kind of have steered away from. Especially when games came out and they only cost like 99 cents. You bought Angry Birds 1, I believe, was 99 cents or $1 or $2 when it came out. So the idea that games would spend a lot of money, and you'd have to spend a lot of money to buy a game on your phone, was a little unheard of. So then there came the free games. Emphasis on free. And that came with its own problems, because the free games were these things that were like, sure, you don't have to spend money to start playing the game, but if you really want to get anywhere in it, you will have to spend money. And thusly, that created a whole issue in itself, and that's the reason why iOS stores, instead of saying free on the item purchase, they will say get. You will get the game. It's not free. So even the language changed because of that sort of thing. Now, video game companies, even mobile ones, want to still make money, so that leads to a lot of microtransactions in mobile games. And for some reason, I spent probably too much time trying out various crappy like character collector games where you basically are just kind of collecting groups of characters to fight for you of various qualities. And they usually come in the form of, they usually want you to spend your money in two fashions. Either to buy gems, because gems are the only means of currency. So you trade your cash for gems for stuff. Or you buy loot boxes. And you buy the loot box, and the loot boxes come in different qualities, and you spend the most money, and you get the best loot box, and you get the best items in it. So it itself is a bit of a gamble as to what you're going to get. Even if you buy the best loot box, there's no guarantee it's going to give you the character or item that you want. So in the sense, that is also a gamble. Then, somewhere around that time, between mobile gaming and Battlefront 2, subscription services started showing up with mystery crates. Loot box is probably the most notable one, or at the very least, the most advertised one in regards to like the video game circles. And I subscribed to that for a while, probably for a couple years or so. Then one day I went to this local comic convention, and they had some loot boxes there, so I'm like, sure, why not? And the thing is, what I especially liked about the loot boxes I didn't really like them for what was inside the box. Is I liked them for the element of surprise, because I feel as an adult there's very little surprise in your life. As Christmas, birthdays, you know what you're getting pretty much. I remember getting a gift and I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's a jacket, isn't it? And then my mom's like, yeah. How did you know? And I'm like, good guess. Yeah. It was a decent jacket. But anyway, there's very little surprise in gift giving because largely you've presented a list of what you want, because how are people supposed to know what you have? Sometimes I don't even know what I have. I probably have got a couple copies of. There are a couple games in which I've got more than one copy of because I accidentally made a mistake as to what I have and what I don't have. So how should I expect other people to know what I have unless I prepare that list ahead of time? So there's no surprise to the gift giving itself. So getting the subscription loot box was fun because it created this element of surprise. What is in the box? I don't know. I'd have to open it up to find out. Then I went to this local Comic-Con and I got a loot box there. And I opened it up and everything in it was crap. And then I realized, I had an epiphany right then and there, that all of the things that I got were crap. That I didn't need everything that I got. So I immediately canceled my loot box subscription. I kept I don't want to be down on loot box in regards to this because I'd switched it over to their shirt subscription because their shirts are actually pretty snazzy. But I got rid of a lot of the loot box stuff because I didn't need it. They were just kind of cluttering. And considering I've got like I probably don't need Fallout Strength bobblehead, but I keep it around just the same because it's kind of fun. But there was so much loot box stuff that weren't even fun, so I just kind of got rid of it. Would you say that was a gamble? Like, was I paying money hoping for something? And for a loot box, I don't think I was, because there wasn't any expectation as to what I was going to get out of it. I was expecting to get something interesting, and if I got something interesting, I would maintain my subscription. If I didn't get something interesting, I would cancel my subscription, which I did, because I didn't get something interesting. I currently actually subscribe to one monthly box, which is Retro Game Treasure. I'll put a link in the description, because obviously I need more video games in my life. It is a monthly service that sends you video games. You you check off games on a list on their website of what you have, so that way they don't send you doubles of what you have, and they send you video games. And I'm like, yeah. And some of the games I'm like, I don't necessarily need Hot Shots Tennis for the PSP, but as somebody who's just actively collecting video games, that is basically like supplemental collection. So there's still the surprise, but I'm not expecting anything out of it. I'm not gambling for this big title. I'm not really expecting a specific title as much as I'm expecting a video game. And when video games show up, I'm like, whoa, video games, I won. Then you've got Overwatch and Star Wars Battlefront 2. That was a really long-winded way to get to the topic at hand. With both of these games, the more you play, you can actually earn loot boxes on their own. It takes time. If you want to open up like 100 loot boxes, that's a lot of time played in Overwatch. But if you enjoy the game, then you're going to essentially just be earning loot boxes continuously. And I would imagine the same could be said of Star Wars Battlefront 2. Although the issue that Star Wars Battlefront 2 brings to the table is it hides upgrades. It hides upgrades to your weapons in its loot boxes. So if you want to be more effective as a player, you need to have the best upgrades attached to your character classes. If you don't have the best upgrades, you might not do as much damage. You might not be as capable. Versus, say, Overwatch, actually all of the loot box stuff is periphery. It's costumes, it's emotes, it's dances, it's victory poses, it's spray paints. Now, both of these games have reached a point in which, like, people who, like, when Angriest Pat dumps a huge chunk of money on Overwatch loot boxes, he's trying to get something. He's trying to get a specific costume. But in order to get that costume, he has to spend money on the loot box. And then it is a gamble to see if he's going to get the costume he wants. In order to get the power upgrade, you have to either play crap ton. I'm told that the amount of hours you'd actually have to play Battlefront 2 in order to unlock specific characters is, at the very least at launch, it was ridiculous. But if you spend money, it's a gamble that you're going to get what you want. But are they a form of gambling that needs to be controlled by the government? And I think that's a tough question, especially for me to answer right now. Right now, I think I just kind of want to bring up the topic and maybe start thinking about it, but not necessarily come to an answer just yet. Because in both cases of Overwatch and with Star Wars Battlefront 2, there's a lot of money being spent in the hopes of acquiring something. You spend money in hopes of getting something out of it. But it's a perfectly just random chance on the actual acquisition of that something, which is basically gambling. Although, if you're going to compare the loot box model to any current gambling item, then I would imagine the closest gambling game that loot boxes would be connected to would probably be the slot machine. Because with a slot machine, you put in money, you pull the lever. Actually, you don't even pull a lever anymore. You just push a button. That's not very exciting. It's not as cool as it used to be. Although, actually, slot machines have gotten really fancy, and some of them have, like, giant screens. Like, the last time I was at a casino, they had a huge, like, Sharknado slot machine. It's like, who even wants a Sharknado slot machine? But it's there. So there's, like, tons of flashing lights, noise, sound, just, like, going off everywhere. And, like, I'm just trying to match 3 symbols in order to make some money. But you put money in, you're trying to get money out. There is a specific goal in mind. And I suppose that's the biggest difference between the regular nature of gambling and loot boxes, is because with most gambling these days, you put money in expecting to get money back. You're betting on the pot. Whereas loot boxes, you're putting money in expecting to get item, expecting to get thing back. Whether that's a form of gambling in itself, I don't know. I don't know whether that needs to be enforced, especially since after Battlefront 2, there was a lot of crap given to Electronic Arts for its poor decisions. Like, people didn't just say, you know, these loot boxes are bad purchasing decisions. We're just not going to spend money. People actively were upset with Electronic Arts, so much so that game studios these days feel as though they have to announce that their game is not going to have loot boxes. Electronic Arts has already announced that Star Wars Jedi is not going to have microtransactions or loot boxes. That has to be, like, they've said that up front before the game has even released, because the disaster that was Battlefront 2 hit them so hard. So maybe having the government involved is a bit too much, because clearly Electronic Arts was already hit where it hurt the most for them, their wallet. Or their checking account. One of the two. I'd also like to talk about Gameclub. If you haven't heard of Gameclub, I've got a link in the description. It's like www.gameclub.io. And it's for the iPhone. It's a new developer who is coming out, and they're taking older iOS games, and they're re-engineering them for modern systems. And while that might not sound too exciting to most people, for me, I find that very interesting, because with the iPhone, there have been so many upgrades, so many iterations, that by this point in time, there are lots of original iPhone games that do not work on modern systems. Some games that I was personally fond of, there was the Mass Effect game, Double Dragon on the iOS, which I actually I actually had to kind of rig it up in order to play for my channel, because I just happened to have an old iPad that could play it. But if I didn't, I would be screwed. But there are lots of these older iOS games that have kind of been forgotten about, either because the original developers do not have the rights to those games anymore, or because the original developers don't have the money to fund these games. And right now they're kind of in like this beta test phase, and I've signed up for the beta test, so I've been playing some of these older iOS games. Most of them I haven't heard of myself, except for one particular game titled Run Roo Run. So I'd originally heard of Run Roo Run when I was writing for the video game website thunderboltgames.com. I had not written the review of it. I had read a fellow writer's review of it, and because of that writer's review, I'd play the game. So it was interesting playing the game again after so many years. Although playing that game again has kind of showcased the issues that Gameclub has had to deal with, because a lot of these old games were very specifically designed for their old systems, and sometimes certain feature sets don't quite transfer over to modern phones. Such as, in Run Roo Run, the idea is you're a kangaroo, you go from one side of the screen to the other. There are obstacles in the way, you run across, hop over the obstacle, and then carry on to the other side. One such series of levels has that obstacle essentially being a bird that flies across the screen, and the idea is that you're supposed to jump on the bird, bounce off of it, and get more distance. But because of the way the game was set up, on the modern device, the bird starts too far away, making some of the levels actually impossible to complete correctly. So it's interesting to see what kind of design elements that they actually have to not just engineer, but also kind of figure out logically too, because of the way they were set up. Still, it'll be interesting to see what other games they're able to kind of pick up, especially since they're going to largely be doing the work, whether that kind of encourages developers or publishers to be more willing to kind of hand out their games for sale. I also wonder how profitable they're going to be. Hopefully they will be. That way they could help kind of resurrect not only those dead games from the old iOS days, but also kind of showcase how the mobile gaming community could actually have quality titles. As for news for the month of May, June really is going to be the big month for video games, especially. Though there are a couple things that happened. There was the trailer for the new Terminator movie, though I think I'm going to talk about that next month. There was the not more footage for the new for the Final Fantasy VII remake, which is apparently going to be in episodes for the purposes of telling the story from multiple characters' viewpoints, which I think would be especially interesting because over the years, Final Fantasy VII has kind of acquired this appreciation not just for its protagonist, but for its side characters. So the ability to play as its side characters to go on their own stories sounds like it would be very interesting. There's also been Jim Sterling had an excellent video on just some of the things the Epic Game Store has been up to, more specifically this sale they tried running for games that aren't out yet. And that's in the link to that is in the description below. And he does an excellent job in regards to describing what happened and why it's terrible. So if you want to know more about that, he sums it up much better than I would. I finally did spend more time with Nintendo VR, and it's interesting playing this VR game that's meant for more of a casual market, but not just a casual market, but also children in general, because you look at the instructions for how it tells you to assemble these cardboard boxes, and I really, really feel that they were clearly targeting children and not adults. It would have been nice to have like one version of the instructions for kids and one version of the instructions for adults, because it feels like I'm really being talked down to by the instruction manual. Every time it's constantly telling me to crease these tabs on the cardboard box, and then it emphasizes the word crease over and over again. It's like, stop, just go to the instructions. You're just wasting my time. Also, to kind of bring that idea of that this is just a VR game for more like casual approach to VR or for children, is that a lot of the VR games that it has attached to it are very gimmicky. They're very basic. There's not really too much depth to them. You assemble the toy, and that I feel like is the majority of the game. I probably spent more time assembling these cardboard controllers than I did actually playing the game. But I mean, consider how complicated some of these cardboard controllers are. Like this blaster thing. It's multiple parts. It's got internal components, external components, rubber bands on the inside, rubber bands on the outside. It's got a canister, or should I say, yeah, sure, why not? A canister on the inside. It locks in place. You can hear it locking. That's kind of like a hook that grabs onto the inside of the canister. And then it has this button on the back. You press the button and it releases said canister. And the canister releases, and due to the rubber bands pull the canister over, and you hear that smacking sound of the canister hitting the side of the blaster. So it is very complicated and very long. I admit, very boring in regards to assembling together, although it might be because of me as a person. Because I grew up playing with Legos, but the older I get, I feel, I don't know what the problem is. It might be due to lack of patience. Maybe I just don't have the same patience that I used to have. But I remember when I tried out Minecraft for the first time, I tried out the free version of Minecraft. And I was over at a friend's place trying it out. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna build a skyscraper. So I spent like a few hours building it, and then I came over like a week or so later, and I spent another few hours building it. Then I came over a week or so later. I spent another few hours building it. And then this was around the time that Dead Space 2 was in the development. And one of the engineers over at Visceral Games, they made a trailer to the game that emulated that was a copy of the actual trailer they released, except it was done in Minecraft. They recreated the original trailer for Dead Space 2 in Minecraft. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, that's amazing. It probably took a really long time to make that. And I just turned off Minecraft and I was done. I did not need nor want to play that game anymore. The entire idea of spending time building and crafting things just kind of seems just like time. So when I played Fallout 4, I more or less avoided the entire settler building phase that they try to hustle you in. I think I built like a house that had a staircase going to like a room that was supported by nothing, and then it had another staircase going to a room with no roof, and that's about as far as I got to building anything. So the idea of spending hours building these things was not very appealing, and I spent a lot of that time kind of watching YouTube videos while also kind of assembling these things. But it would have been like, there's very little to gain from having the model versus just having the remotes. I wouldn't have minded if they tried to make like maybe if they just made a headset. They just made a headset that you slide the switch into, that's strapped to your face, and then you used the remotes to control. That would have been more interesting to me than having to worry about assembling cardboard, because in theory they would have had more time to design the games than have to worry about the designing of the cardboard. Though I would argue that the cardboard gun offers something that just having a remote doesn't. Because when you just have a remote, you press the button, it does the thing, and maybe it causes some vibration. But the actual physicality of pumping the gun and firing it and hearing like, it feels different. So I guess I have to give props to that. I'll stop now. No, I won't stop. I still actually have stuff to talk about. Specifically, E3's on the horizon. There's been a few people who have stated that they're dropping out. They're not going to have main conferences. Electronic Arts, I believe, said they're not going to have a main conference, but they're still going to do other things. But then, do I really care about the newest FIFA and the newest Madden? I'm sure somebody out there does. But if I remember correctly, the last time they had a conference, they debuted Command & Conquer for the phone, and they brought on like mobile gamers. So it's really not that, we're not missing much unless they're talking about Dragon Age 4. If they're talking about Dragon Age 4, that'll be something to tune into. Sony's apparently not doing a conference this year, but then again, most of the things they talked about last year still haven't come out. The Samurai game hasn't come out. Kojima's game hasn't come out. So Last of Us 2 has not. So it's like, there's not that much of a point for them to really do something until maybe next year when they have like new hardware to preview, maybe. But in regards to everybody else, the only one that I'm genuinely excited, the only one that I really want to see more than anything else is Devolver Digital, because Maria Zook as Nina Struthers just knocked it out of the park for me last year. And if she's back for this new conference, then who cares about new games when you have really, really clever hilarious production value. So it'll be interesting what they do after that, considering that she's been turned into RoboCop last time, or Robo CEO. I don't know how that works for CEOs. In regards to the channel, Doom 2016 version is going to be finishing up coming this Sunday. Assassin's Creed is still going on. Legacy of the First Blade episodes 1 and 2 have been wrapped up. Episode 2 wraps up this coming Monday, I believe. And then, or the Monday after. No, this Monday. Life is Strange 2 episode 3 has finished, so it's going to be a little bit before episode 4 shows up, obviously, since it's still being in development. I would like to finish off as much of Assassin's Creed expansion content as I can, because they still haven't finished Fate of Atlantis, so I'm going to try to knock out Legacy of the First Blade and as much of Fate of Atlantis that is out before moving on, switching to a different game. Most likely that different game is going to be Mortal Kombat 11 or Battlefield 5, because I kind of want to keep that Monday through Wednesday schedule to focus more on newer games that I haven't played, and that Friday through Sunday schedule to kind of older, sort of. So after I'm done with Doom, that's going to be either followed up by Alan Wake or Alias for the PlayStation 2. Last but not least, I would like to talk about Captain Marvel. I was talking to a friend of mine about Captain Marvel because neither of us were particularly impressed, but neither of us necessarily didn't like it. We thought I believe we came away from it thinking it was okay. It was all right. There was nothing particularly special about the movie. There was nothing that the movie really did better than anything else. And I was wondering what could have made it a better movie. And I started to try to come up with a list of things that would have made it a better movie, and the most that I got before kind of running into the problem that the movie does have a few fundamental flaws is an expanded beginning. Because when Captain Marvel as a movie begins, she's having this kind of like dream sequence where she's having flashbacks to her life on Earth. And then she wakes up, she's on this other planet, then she's going on a mission, she's talking to this AI, and then she's crash landing on Earth. And that whole introduction approach kind of reminds me of something a friend of mine said about an attempt I made at writing a story a long time ago. The story was a basic revenge plot. This woman's husband is killed, and then she goes on to try to murder the people who killed her husband while hallucinating his presence because that sounded cool at the time. And I was telling a friend of mine about this, and the movie would have actually started after his funeral. And the friend of mine asked me, okay, that sounds interesting, but what happened before? Basically, what this friend of mine was introducing to me was character development, because characters have to change. And if we see her if we saw that character at the funeral for the first time, and then we follow that character from the funeral to killing the last guy, essentially that character never really develops as much as that character does things and does events. Now, I'm not saying that Captain Marvel doesn't have character development, but as a character, by the time we meet her, she's already kind of like this victim of both the accident her plane has gotten into and the various torture that she had received from the Kree. So her own personality, her own way of interacting with the world is very alien because she doesn't remember so much of her life on Earth. When she shows up on Earth, she's very similar to Thor in a way, in that she doesn't recognize most Earth customs. So the question that can then be asked is, what happened? What happened before? Yeah, if I spoke English in a proper fashion, I would ask, what happened before she was tortured by the Kree? So I think it would have been more interesting if the start of the film began with like the last day, as a regular human being piloting these test planes. And then it would end with her crashing the plane, and then it would cut to her waking up on the Kree ship. It would raise suspicions as to who the Kree were, how she got there, while also kind of introducing character relationships. We would see her with the woman who was in charge of the test facility. So then we'd be like, okay, she was the one in charge of the test facility. Why is she also the AI? We would see her with the cat. We would see her with the with her co-pilot. So we would have these character relationships established before we went back to them. It would also kind of fix one fundamental flaw in the Captain Marvel movie, and that is that she has no life to return to. The life that she is reviewing is a life that has gone past. She cannot be a test pilot anymore because the facility has been closed. The person heading the test facility is dead, I believe. Yeah, dead. So she has no life to return to, which is closer in comparison to Captain America. Because when Captain America wakes up from the ice, it's been 50 or so years since 60 or so years since he'd been frozen under the ice. So there's no, like, he's trying to return to some manner of living, but the entire world has changed since then. He has to learn what memes are, whereas for Captain Marvel, her friends are still alive. It's only been like a few years or so, but she seems to only have the one friend. She seems to only have the one boss. And that kind of leads to my problem with Fallout New Vegas. Because in Fallout New Vegas, you're playing as this former courier who's gotten a bum hand. And when you get back to your courier job, it seems that nobody, like your boss recognizes you as being a courier, but nobody else in the world has recognized you as being a courier. So I find that kind of odd that you had such a small footprint, despite the fact that you should have been a little bit everywhere. And with Captain Marvel, like, she has such a small footprint that she doesn't really have much of a reason to stay on Earth. She's never really given a reason to stay. When she's trying to figure out, like, the entire idea of the movie is kind of like connecting from Captain Marvel to Avengers Infinity Game, and why Sam Jackson had to summon her. Where was she this whole time? So the idea that she was going to leave Earth was just more or less an eventuality of the plot, rather than a character decision that she had to make. She didn't really have to worry about leaving a life behind because there was no life for her to return to. The movie also suffers from having no, like, a story with no stakes to it. There was no danger in the story. Because that, and I think that's the problem with prequels in general. But for Captain Marvel, even more so, because, like, you know Captain Marvel is going to be okay at the end of the movie because she still has to show up for Endgame. you know that Sam Jackson is going to be okay throughout the movie, with the exception of his eye, because he has to show up for all of the other Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. You know that Phil Coulson is unaffected because he still has to show up in the rest of the MCU. Later on in the movie, the character of Ronan shows up. It's been a while. Ronan the Deceiver, as the villain of Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was like, it's Ronan. But then I'm thinking to myself, instead of thinking to others, like, what are the stakes there? He can't be killed, so he has to leave himself, because he can't. If he can't be killed because he has to show up in Guardians of the Galaxy, he has to survive, which means that the danger that he's in is also in as little danger as what Captain Marvel is in. So of all of the, she spends a lot of time fighting villains that aren't very effective at anything they do. Jude Law, who is an excellent actor, and I actually kind of like his villain a little bit more, because his villain, as a villain, his character isn't exactly like the head boss or anything. He's just more or less an agent. He actually has to respond to his superiors in the Kree military. So basically, like, he's more or less the controlling force. He's the opposition to kind of keep Captain Marvel enslaved. The choice for Captain Marvel is to be free or to be enslaved. And so she must fight him in order to free herself. But he doesn't actually show up until like the end of the movie. And there was a similar problem that was given to that for Mass Effect 1. Because Saren is the villain of Mass Effect 1, and you see him at the beginning of the movie. See him at the beginning of the game, and then you see him like once somewhere in the middle, and then you see him at the end, and that's it. And for like a 25-hour game that kind of takes its main villain and kind of like shoves it off to the side, so it makes it feel like it's less important because of it. So if there were more fights between her and Jude Law's character, that would have made Jude Law's character appear more dangerous. But by the time that she fights him, like, she's already become super awesome. So it's like, what are you gonna do? You got nothing. She's awesome. Either way, I still there's still fun to be had in the movie. It's not terrible. I think Brie Larson does a great job as Captain Marvel. She's hilarious. She's goofy, and it's well done for what it tries to do. But it's not as good as it could have been. As for now, so long, folks, and have a good night. Thank you for watching. Questions, comments, recommendations for something to play next? Comment down below or send it on over to itsoundedgoodonpaper@gmail.com. That's itsoundedgoodonpaper@gmail.com. So long for now.